Hello and welcome to One Story, One Voice, your weekly online live interview around one story and one voice. Brought to you by the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication at OP Jindal Global University. The story today are the dangers that free speech faces. And that's, of course, not a danger that free speech faces today. Free speech has been facing dangers since time immemorial. But today, I think it's a time of grave crisis. Our first guest in this season of One Story, One Voice was human rights crusader Harsh Mandar, who has been charge sheeted by the Delhi police for instigating the Delhi riots. He gave a speech that called for love and non-violence. Government agencies consider this an act of provocation, says Apurvanand, who teaches in the Delhi University. Soon after Harsh was sent the summons, the Uttar Pradesh police filed an FIR against another friend and former colleague, Supriya Sharma, for her report on the post-lockdown situation in Varanasi's Domari village. Varanasi is the constituency of India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, and is also home to Kabir. As you know, today's show is Talking to Kabir. The question Kabir is asking, kahan se aaya, kahan jaoge? Where did you come from? Where are you going? An existential question, but made more relevant in our times. And to answer that and many other questions that Kabir raises, we have Shabnam Virmani. Bear with me because I love reading out people's biodata, which I didn't think was important till a few years ago, but increasingly I think it's very important because you need to know. We know so little about each other. Sometimes we know so little about our friends, in fact. Shabnam is a filmmaker, a singer, a storyteller, a writer, and she has been exploring the myriad possibilities and power of mystic poetry and the oral traditions. But since 2002, now mark the year 2002. In this year, the communal riots that broke out in Gujarat propelled her to seek answers to fundamental questions of identity and being the voice through the voice of the 15th century mystic poet Kabir. It is just a coincidence that Harsh Mandar, who was a civil servant till then, quit the services after he visited Gujarat post Godhra riots and gave himself to addressing problems of social inequality. The same year, Shabnam was invited to be the artist in residence at the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Bangalore, where she shaped the Kabir Project. But for many of you, and since this program is being brought to you by a journalism school, it is pertinent, it's important to remember that Shabnam actually is trained in journalism. She studied journalism at the Times Research Foundation in Delhi and studied communication at Cornell. And as a young reporter, Shabnam broke the story of Roop Kanwar's Sati in Rajasthan, which became a benchmark report, and the issue was later taken up by became a powerful women's movement. So Shabnam, after a fairly long introduction, but this introduction was important to put the story that we are discussing in context and why you are here answering those questions. How do we answer the question that Kabir raises?
Thank you, Kishalay, for this opportunity to speak at this moment when, in a sense, free speech and speaking is under threat. I wonder, if Kabir had lived in our times, I'm pretty sure FIRs would have been lodged against him for sure. Because as we know, Kabir fiercely interrogated structures of religion, society, as he interrogated himself. And the very spirit of Kabir, I think, demands an interrogation of the outside and of the inside. And I think we live in such fractious times where identities are so wafer thin and so sensitive. It takes very little to upset, to hurt sentiments. And I think Kabir would have said that our faith is very weak. Because when will our faith be strong? When we have the courage to interrogate, to ask questions of the world, ask questions of ourselves, test those things that we claim to be, whether we claim to be of this religion or that religion. Is it a label? Is it an identity that we hide behind? Is it something that we pin our insecure self on? Or is it something that we have understood, we have tested, we've interrogated, we've made it part of our practice? You know, I think when we practice a tradition, we are less concerned about protecting it. I think the politics of protecting traditions comes when we inadequately practice the faith that we defend. If we truly practice the faith we defend, we would be more self-assured and less destabilized by people saying things or writing things or questioning or inviting discussion, debate, criticism. You know, Kabir said, "Nindak niyare rakhiye, angan kuti bandhao, bin sabun pani bina, nirmal kare swabhav." You know, Kabir would be the one who would say, invite a critic into your home, give him a room in your house without water, without soap. It will make sure that your self is scrubbed clean, is interrogated. That's the role of a critic. If we can't withstand jokes and criticisms about our tradition, our faith in that tradition is very, very weak. And, you know, I think those are the times we live in. And I think those are the times Kabir lived in, which is why he spoke the way he did. And I think this call for knowing something beyond its label, you know, whether it is Ram, Kabir would say, I don't turn the beads of a rosary anymore. My lips don't utter the name Ram because my Ram is chanting me. I have found my peace, you know. So who is the Ram that we fight for? And those are the questions Kabir is asking us right now, I think. And asking fundamental questions like, kahan se aaya, kahan jaoge? Yes.
And, you know, Kabir also lived at a time and in a city which wasn't easy for him. And yet he seemed to have flourished there. I mean, though he leaves Kasi and goes off to Maghar to die, and of course, you know, there are lots of legends and myths around that. One doesn't know the exact history about it, but, you know, he managed to survive. Was the ancient and the medieval India, despite its rigidities, despite its far greater orthodoxies, more tolerant, accommodative place than what it is today? Because today it seems like, you know, even you know, the city from where Kabir comes, Kabir may not have been able to exist or coexist with others out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really a historian, Kishalay, to say if that particular moment in history was more intolerant as the moment in history we are passing through right now. But I think this, the impulse of fear and the impulse of love, these are the twin poles of human consciousness. And they have coexisted in the human psyche since time immemorial. So which is why we find Kabir's voice continuing to be so relevant, because he is inviting in us an investigation of who we are, where we have come from, and where we derive our sense of security from. You know, Kabir says very beautifully in a poem, Bina thor vishwas, you know, he says, can you find security in homelessness, in anchorlessness, bina thor? where you don't have to clutch on to external labels and congregations and institutions to feel secure, to feel a sense of belonging. Because the sense of belonging he demands of us is much more rigorous, challenging, and it's in the body, like that's why he will say, Jahan baithun wahan chhaya ji. He doesn't need the security of labels and identities and communities and nations to feel secure, because his security comes from within. He has interrogated these core questions of where are you coming from and where are you going, and found some answers which give him that stability of being homeless, of burning down his house. That's what he will demand of us.
You have traveled with folk singers in India and Pakistan and met several lovers of Kabir, journeyed down the Kabir Panth. And you've also directed the 4 films based on those journeys, Chalo Hamara Desh, and I'm mentioning those for the audience, Had Anhad, Koi Sunta Nahi, and Kabir Khada Bazaar Mein, which is a very popular film. Hey. And Kabira Khada Bazaar Mein, which is a very, very popular film and which won the National Film Award in 2012. Mm-hmm. How is Kabir for you and for us and for everyone, both political and personal?
I think Kabir's inner gaze and outer gaze is equally fierce. When he says that we are all one, when he speaks the voice of social justice, it is coming not just from a gaze outward which sees disparity, inequity, sorrow, trauma. It is a gaze inwards which has shown him a connection between the outside and the inside. He says, Khel Brahmand ka is pind mein dekhiya, to jagat ki brahmana dur bhagi. Bahar bhitar ek akashwat hai. He's saying what is inside is what is outside. And if you connect very deeply with the self and ground it in something outside of these external categories or identities that we attach ourselves to, then you will be free to love. Then jo khud se jud gaya, wo sab se jud gaya. So this personal gaze and this political gaze, this inner gaze and this outer gaze, this spiritual gaze, if you will, and the social gaze come from one place. You understand? It is not that Kabir is without faith and only a social critic or an activist or a social reformist. He is at once both spiritual and social in his interrogation of the self and the world.
Also when you were traveling with the folk singers, and I know that it was Prahlad Singh Tipanya, and my salutations to him. Been privileged to listen to Prahlad at our common friend Ravi's home a number of times, and you picked up the tambura and started singing. That wasn't part of your life goals or plan, I suppose, to start singing with the tambura. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, I have talked about this and written about it as well, which is to say that there is an experience of the poetry of Kabir that comes from the oral traditions when the poem becomes a song that allows you a certain immersion in the meanings of Kabir that I think merely reading him doesn't facilitate that quality of rasa that the poetry has when it comes to you as a song. And when I was shooting with Prahlad ji and Mahesha Ram ji and Mukhtyar and all these people, I had a great desire to end this separation between me and what I was shooting and actually become one with the sound. I think the satsang tradition is a very special tradition in our country, and I think all healthy societies have such spaces where you can ritually enact an engagement with your non-self, where you let all particularities melt away and you let go of a sense of self as X, Y, or Z, and you arrive into a place of oneness or a place where identity has dissolved. And the satsang is a place which does that. The experience of song is something I think that does that. It induces a state of suspension of all identity. And I think that's what Kabir invites us to do, which is to feel located, to experience your name, your language, your religion, your nation, your particularity, your body, but also to keep leaping out of it, to experience something that is much more viscerally connected and one with everything, and I think the experience of music, the experience of singing, the experience of satsang dissolves all these boundaries.
For members of the audience, who may not be familiar with Prahlad Singh Tipania is a renowned Kabir singer from the Malwa region, and he, almost became a guru to Shabnam, and he's part of the musical tradition, that celebrates Kabir and Kabir's mysticism, and along with singing and journeying with this, the yatra is I think a very interesting word in India that we use, because yatra combines within itself not just the physical journey, but also a journey within us.
Within, yes.
And I think, Kabir yatra is very much that yatra. Yes. And Shabnam, in that yatra, doesn't just hum and sing and play the tambura, but I think she blends stories and traditions and anecdotes through the songs, and that's her popularity. But Shabnam, while you did this, I feel that there are many Kabirs appropriated in various regions by various communities. How did you set out to find your Kabir?
Well, I guess I was always finding my Kabir, even as I was searching and seeking and finding out what meanings Kabir holds in the hearts of so many different people. And I think along these journeys, I began to realize that Kabir would stop me on these journeys and say, Kabir, Kabir, kya kare? Socho aap sharir. It was literally a question directly to me, because I was there shooting and researching Kabir for years. And he would ask me, Kabir, Kabir, kya kare? Socho aap sharir. Jo tan khoja aapna, aap hi das Kabir. So it's okay to search for somebody else's Kabir, but the real journey begins when you discover, I guess, a spirit of Kabir within yourself. And that is really, for me personally, has meant being able to go beyond certainty. I have said this elsewhere. Go beyond a sense of righteousness and be able to inhabit the place of ambiguity, the place of not knowing, the place that comes between two dualities. We are all trained to shore up our identity, to, define who we are. And Kabir invites us to not know, not just Kabir, the Sufis, the mystics invite us to not know who we are, to not be in such a hurry to define, because definition destroys, actually, because life and who we are is really far more subtle and far more complex than can be held by yes and no, So that journey was compelling. I mean, it was irrevocable for me as I was searching for these outward Kabirs. It was immediately speaking to me and asking me those questions. And Kabir has such a interrogative voice. He's always asking questions. Kai dhoondti phire mari heli, and you just always feel very, very personally addressed. What are you searching for? He'll ask you. Bahar kahin bhatke? Why are you searching outside? Why are you wandering here? Where have you come from? He'll cleave through our dull, leaden, complacent, habitual ways of knowing who we are and knowing how we relate with the world, he'll keep shaking it up and asking you, question all your assumptions. You think you are this, but are you really that? Or, so, and I think that spirit of questioning is concomitant with the spirit of faith. It seems like an oxymoron that you would say, I have faith, meaning I don't ask questions. But I think he brings the two together, because if you ask questions, your conviction gets stronger through some testing, through some personal experience. And when your conviction gets stronger, that faith is unshakable. The faith that comes through the path of interrogation.
So this is a kind of a dualism that Kabir, Kabir almost dwells in dualisms, right?
Well, no, he collapses dualisms.
He collapses dualisms.
He will insist on asking you to know who you are outside of a duality. If your definition of who you are is on one side of a duality, meaning I am Indian, I'm not Pakistani, or I am Hindu, I'm not a Mussalman, or I am upper caste, I'm not a lower caste, or I am, X and not Y. These are all the dualities that come to define us. He will, or I'm straight, I'm not gay. There are so many dualities that we get embedded in, that define our language, our experience of life and ourselves, which are, what should I say, violent binaries that are not true, because the truth is in between. So Kabir will keep bringing us to that in-between space, that uncomfortable space between yes and no. And it's an uncomfortable space, because we all, not just religious bigots, all of us are secure because we have defined ourselves on one side of some kind of duality. We are secularists, not religious fundamentalists. Just look more carefully. You begin to see bigotry in yourself. You begin to see intolerance in yourself. All this is the path of compassion. Because when you come to a place of in between yes and no, when you go beyond righteousness, you become capable of compassion. I think that's what Kabir says. I just came across this lovely doha where he says, "Yeh tat veh tat ek hai, ek pran dui gaat, apne jiya se janiye mere jiya ki baat." This truth, that truth, it's the same. One life, two forms. Look into your own heart to know the matters of my heart. It's such a beautiful invitation to compassion, to knowing, to empathy, to love, to being able to understand what is the fear that besets your soul, or the craving, or the anguish, or the angst. Yes, I hear it, I see it, because I feel it too. This capacity to collapse that duality of self and other, and to see sameness across these borders is what Kabir will invite us to. So he's always collapsing dualities.
At this stage, I'm going to also request the audience, as I always do, to start sending in questions. We usually broadcast, live stream it on various platforms, but today, because of a technical glitch, we are live streaming it only on YouTube. Whoever is on YouTube, please start sending in questions. Some of the questions have already started coming in. We will take the questions soon. After maybe about 5-10 minutes, we will respond to the questions. After I have asked my questions to Shabnam, I have a couple of other questions. Something that intrigued me always is that when we talk about oral tradition, particularly Kabir was not literate, he did not write. So whatever we read about Kabir is, of course, oral tradition. How do you differentiate between which is the authentic Kabir's voice and which is probably, could be morphed, could have, there could be other people who've actually, given their voice to that?
Yeah, so very early on, Kishalay, in my research travels, I realized that the project of seeking authenticity in the voice of Kabir is not only a very uphill and failed project, because it's historically very difficult to do that. Some scholars have tried, but there is no documentation early enough in Kabir's, in the history after Kabir, for us to, with any degree of certainty, say that this is the authentic Kabir and this is the inauthentic Kabir. And actually, somewhere along the line, I began to realize to some degree the not irrelevance. I guess scholarly inquiry about these things is important, but I think by exclusively focusing in an obsessive way on the authenticity of the words, we are missing the point. Because I think the power of Kabir today is that the historical Kabir has faded. Kabir has become a thought stream in this country that thrives and grows in people's hearts, minds, and consciousnesses in a way that does incredible tribute to the legacy of Kabir, because people have made Kabir their own. And it is through their lived experience that they create new poems of Kabir with new signatures, and they give it new metaphors that are more relevant to the times that we live in. So it's not one frozen text, much like a scripture, which Kabir was very fond of poking fun at. It would be a great irony if we made a scripture out of Kabir, and claimed this and only this, because Kabir, it's exactly for that reason that Kabir would poke fun of holy books, because not because what is in there isn't true, but what's more relevant is, has that been born or lived inside of you, or borne the test of your own lived experience? Is it a truth or a wisdom or a insight that was born through your own earning, tumhari kamai pe, not because you are reading from here and there and regurgitating second-hand truths, So that is the spirit that the oral traditions, I think, celebrate. They are not concerned about the project of authenticity as much as we might be, because for them, the ultimate truth of authenticity is your heart. If it makes, if it percolates into your lived practice in a way that is meaningful, it is an authentic Kabir poem. And it's remarkable how the oral traditions also, of course, are open to distortions and appropriations by various forces. So one can't say that, but by and large, there is a kind of a Kabirian spirit or images or truths that people adhere to. They recognize that trope of Kabir, and will create newer poems that express it in newer ways. And okay, I'll give you an example to illustrate this. I was traveling once with Prahladji in Malwa, and we were returning from a late night concert. And in the car with me was another another singer, Arun Goel. And Prahladji and Arun Goel started discussing this song called Jajo Jajo Re, Ina Samundara Par, Motida Lajo Anabindya. Go across the seas and bring back a pearl that is unpierced. Now that is how Prahladji sings the song. And Arun Goel, when he sings it, he says, bring back a pearl anabhinjya, which means that's not wet. A pearl from the ocean that hasn't been saturated or touched by the waters of the ocean, the Bhavsagar. And they had a big debate that what is the correct word? Okay. They weren't talking about any textual reference point to know whether it is authentic or not. Their reference point was their lived experience. And after a long debate, they felt that both Anbindya, which is unpierced into any framework, narrow framework of meaning, and Andhinjya, which is not touched, were true to the spirit of Kabir. And both had equally powerful meanings, and that both should be sung. So this is an example of how the oral tradition functions in its healthiest spirit, where it is a live text, morphing, being contributed to, evolving based on people's lived experiences.
Before because a lot of questions are coming in, and before we get to the questions, I just wanted to ask you that, Tagore actually was one of the first major translator of Kabir.
Yes.
Was Tagore himself influenced and inspired by Kabir's poetry?
I think so, most certainly. I think I'm told that Tagore's translations of Kabir, in fact, drew on a compilation of the oral traditions done by Kshiti Mohan Sen. And Tagore was very deeply inspired both by Kabir and by many Baul poets and mystics. And you see a reflection of those ideas and images in Tagore's own poetry and novels. So most certainly, I think he drew on this tradition and was influenced by it.
Okay, let me start taking the questions, because they are important questions, and we'll be able to carry on the conversation. Vibha Tripathi asks the question: what is your opinion on so-called intolerance? Intolerance, I suppose.
Well, I think we started this conversation by discussing that.
Yes.
And I think that question, to some degree, I already answered by saying that I think intolerance arises when we don't know a tradition. We merely, जैसे वो फरीद अयाज एक कवाल मुझे मिले थे पाकिस्तान में, वो कहते हैं कि जानने, किसी चीज को जानने में और उस चीज को पहचानने में बहुत अंतर है, and the problem is that we have a lot of pehchans. हमारी ये पहचान है, वो पहचान है, but I don't think our labels or identities are backed up with enough depth of work of knowing a tradition, earning our right to use it as a label if we want to do that. You know what I mean? And that intolerance comes when our faith is very insecure. That's when we become intolerant.
What a discussion on Kabir does is fascinating, because people on the chat box, which I don't have access to, but my research team keeps sending me under this technological innovation that we are doing. People are actually exchanging dohas between themselves. They're not really asking questions.
Yes.
There's someone called Galia Sokolova who is asking a question: how do you explain that Kabir, a 15th century poet, is still such a powerful figure in the collective imagination of modern Indians? Something that Had Anhad showed beautifully. This was actually my final question, which I have sacrificed, but I'm glad that this is the thing. That what makes Kabir relevant today, or even to the urban Indian? Because at a time, remember, I was telling you when we were thinking about this show, that I grew up in a very small hill town in easternmost part of the country, where Hindi or Kabir or any of that was not really popular, and I read Kabir only through Amar Chitra Katha comics. So, but today Kabir seems to be in our living room conversation. But more, I think, relevant to this question: how does Kabir appear as a powerful figure in the collective imagination?
I think I really believe that not just Kabir, but a lot of these mystic poets and lesser known poets from the country, uh, who we have archived and documented in a website called Ajab Sheher. Those of you who are interested in this philosophy and this wisdom, as it has traveled in the voices of thousands of singers, uh, please visit that website and you will find a lot of inspiration, I think, there. I believe that this call to uh, the agam, that place where you can't go, the akat, that which cannot be told, the ajab, that which lies beyond yes and no, and possibly that wonder that lies in paradox. This is our core self. And I think Kabir beckons it. Kabir isko lalkarte hain. And kahin, in the fog of all our dualistic ways of living and knowing ourselves and the world, we hear that call. You know, it's like in the smoke screens of our ordinary ways of living, we see that light. And it draws us, despite ourselves. Uh, we, uh, we, we hear that call that takes us beyond our narrow self, because we then begin to taste freedom, because identities enslave us, they make us fearful, they make us small, they're a very big burden to carry because we constantly have to protect those identities. So when we hear this call, it's very attractive, we want it. And I think Kabir calls us. Uh, and everybody listens in their hearts. And that's why he stays so relevant and so popular, despite everything. I know we are going through very difficult times, not just in India, but globally. It seems almost like, how can people be so driven by fear and so driven by the capacity to other people in hateful ways? But somehow I feel that this counterbalancing force of connection and love is like a huge uh, backlash deluge that is also rising in equal measure, I hope. Uh, and I think uh, that's what we should be collectively summoning forth in our lives and in ourselves.
Manjushri Palit asks, how does Kabir define the two categories when you're talking about, dualism and categories, the categories of women and children?
The two categories of women and children.
I mean, does Kabir have, what does he talk about?
Well, I don't know about children, but Kabir has garhoed many fairly patriarchal and misogynistic metaphors about women. For Kabir, Maya, that web of illusion, uh, uh, is a seductress. For him, she's a Dakini, she's a Mohini, she's a Thagini. So he has chosen to describe her in a kind of feminine gender, which is a little cringy for us to read in this day and age. But he also has other images in his poems where he will say, Nar nari mein ek viraje, do duniya mein dise kyun? That energy is one in both men and women, and why do you see two in this world? So you have some evidence of an awareness in Kabir about the gender issue, though I think some of his more misogynistic poetry does outweigh this the other. But I don't know if he has anything specific to say about children.
Okay. Neelam Sharma asks that, or says, I think we should teach students to understand the philosophy of life experienced by Kabir and other great thinkers. They take it as a lesson to prepare for exams, which are far away from core values. And along with this, I think there is a comment of how to include Kabir in our education system. I think it's extremely, pertinent to ask you, because you are a resident, artist in an educational institution, and how you may have woven this into the pedagogy out there, how Kabir becomes part of it.
Yes, yes. In fact, for a couple of years, we worked with an artist educator, Vishakha Chanchani, to devise creative and innovative ways to take the spirit of Kabir to classrooms. And we have documented those experiments and put them up in a section called Classroom in our website, Ajab Sheher, which I invite you to browse. And more recently, my colleague Prashant Parvatneni at the Kabir Project has been teaching courses for college students using the Ajab Sheher web archive as a text for oral literatures in this country. Because, if you study English literature in universities in India, you will not discover this wealth of orality and the literatures that flow in the oral spaces that we have documented over the last 2 decades. So bringing oral literatures and the spirit of song into the classroom, I think is very important. I think it's a more potent way to encounter Kabir than, these 10 dohas and then uska arth batao, what is the moral of the tale, which I think really domesticates Kabir quite badly. So yeah, I think there are many ways of doing this.
Narayana Rao asks, interesting question, this one. Why secular parties have not actually taken up Kabir as a symbol of their, or used Kabir in their propaganda?
Well, I think secular parties have tried. I personally have also been invited by many parties to come and sing for them, because they do recognize that image of Kabir. But I'm almost happy that we don't instrumentalize Kabir any more than he already is.
Artika Bakshi asks, how do you explain the fact that Kabir was understood only once, he was no more, maybe years and years later? So how does oral tradition do justice to him? I'm not very clear about the question. Kabir, even in his living years, had a lot of followers, right? I mean, he moved from
he had a lot of critics, he had a lot of harassers, and he had a lot of a big following, it seems. And he was both understood and misunderstood back then. And I think the oral traditions do incredible justice to Kabir by interrogating his words and trying to live them. Yeah.
People also wanted some more questions that Kabir raises from you that, resonate our times. I mean, our times, is actually a very vague kind of thing. Specifically, of course, the last 3 months have been extraordinary. And, and everyone uses the word extraordinary. And I was very amused by the word extraordinary, because it's almost like a poverty of vocabulary in the last 3 months. We do not have any vocabulary to explain our condition, because of an entire humanity in a modern era being locked down, locked out, locked in for an invisible fear.
Kishalay, I hear you. I think personally, those of us who've had the privilege to not be homeless, rendered homeless by the lockdown, those of us who've had the privilege to have had steady income and food and not be walking thousands of kilometers to search for home, those of us who have been locked down in comfort have had another kind of discomfort, which is an inability to give vent to restlessness. We have found ourselves imprisoned with reduced choices of how to escape the terror of looking within. And I think the lockdown is a great opportunity to actually stop all this fretful, frenetic wandering, which characterizes so much of the way we lead our lives, to be still and to see what comes up. I think Kabir would support such a project where he would say, stop, slow down. Daudat daudat daudiya, jahan lag man ki daud. He says, you run and you run and you run as far as your mind will run. Daud thake man sthir bhaya, to vastu thor ki thor. But when your mind grows tired of running and comes to a halt, then you find what you were looking for right where you are. But this is not easy because generally we find it easier to run and to run away from this discomfort of looking the self in the face, of confronting death, of confronting loneliness, of confronting even meaninglessness. These core questions. What is it all about? Why are we running? What is giving meaning to our lives? These are the questions that come up, and we are very uncomfortable with them. And so we run again, right? It keeps us busy. I think the lockdown has been an opportunity for some of us to confront these questions, to slow down, to observe the mind and how it flutters and is so restless. So that's one way of relating Kabir to this particular moment we are in, you know. And he will say, Ek sadhe to sab sadhe. Sab sadhe ik jaye. If you seek the one, you will achieve it all. But if you seek and grab at many or the all, you will lose that one. Mali sinche mool ko to phule phale aghay. If the gardener waters the root, then the tree blossoms and comes to fruit. But if we lead our lives by watering the leaves and the flowers, it's not going to help our existence. So I think this lockdown creates an opportunity for us to shut down all the dissipations and to go to the root, to the mool, and answer some of these difficult questions that Kabir asks.
Someone called Harshita Soni in the audience is asking that as a yoga therapist, I'm curious whether Kabir ever referred or said anything about yoga.
Oh, yes, so much, Harshita. In fact, recently I was invited to the Bihar School of Yoga to do a series of satsangs. And it was quite a discovery to be able to bridge the worlds of yogic philosophy and Kabir, because Kabir, according to a lot of scholars, was probably born in a family of Nath Panthis. Nath Panthis, for those of you who know, one of their gurus was Gorakhnath and Machindranath. These are this is the tradition that propounded the Hatha Yoga traditions that are so globally popular today. So Kabir inherited a legacy from his own family of yogic knowledge. And that is, his poems are replete with it, because Kabir is constantly bringing you back to the body as the site of knowledge, the body as the site for experiencing the whole cosmos. Yag hat bhitar sat samundar, you know, the sat samundar can be found right here. And Kabir mistrusts the mind, okay? At least the monkey mind, the lesser mind, the lower mind. And he will invite you to experience knowledge in a continuum of the body mind, you know. And so, yes, there's a lot of yogic reference in Kabir.
There is Reena Jinwala, forgive me if I am mispronouncing your surname, and forgive me the pronunciation and accent of the Doha. Kabira tu hara bhala जीतन दे संसार जीते को हम जब
जम ले जाएगा हारा हरि के द्वार.
So what is success and failure from Kabir's perspective?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you for that. In fact, I'm currently writing a book, a kind of an introductory book with fresh translations of Kabir, in which I have used this doha to spin a whole chapter. It's called "Let the World Win," and in that, I think what I've understood of this doha and what I've understood of this whole question is not so much a question of failure and success as much as control and surrender. So I think when Kabir says, Kabir tu hara bhala, I think he is inviting in us surrender. And when we surrender, we give up our egoic attempts to control our reality, our egoic control. And we become sahaj. Sahaj is a very big term in Kabir. And I think sahaj resonates with the philosophy of Taoism, which says that often to do nothing is the most potent form of doing, because then you suspend your egoic attempts at control and you align with energies that are in you and outside of you. And then the force takes you. You align your energies and you become far more powerful. And that becomes an incredible form of doing, a kind of not doing. I don't know if I'm being clear.
Yeah. It's the idea of the uselessness, how uselessness is very useful.
Yes.
I mean, we don't have to be useful always. We don't have to be productive always. Yeah.
And that often non-action is a very potent form of action. And all our attempts to secure victory are inherently impermanent, which is why he says, Jeete ko jam le jayega, right? Whatever we think we have gained, whatever we think we have achieved is ephemeral. It is here today and gone tomorrow. We all know that. Whereas if we surrender, we arrive into a place of receiving something. I don't think I have done justice to this question. Maybe you should read the chapter I have written. I don't think I was quite in the place to explain this idea right now.
Manjushri Palit, who had asked earlier about women and children, she's got back to say that, is this what Kabir said about children and development? Jab tum aaye jagat mein log hase
hum roye.
Is that
aisi karni kar chalo, hum hase jag roye. Yes, that's a beautiful doha of Kabir's, where he is inviting you they say, the way you go is a big reflection of how you have lived. Your moment of death, in a sense, speaks volumes about how you have lived, because many people will go clinging and weeping and full of unfulfilled aspirations and, oh, Mary, abhi to mujhe ye bhi karna tha, wo bhi karna tha, and full of attachments, unwilling to go. That's one way of going. And he's saying, go in such a way that nothing has stuck. Nothing has, whatever you have discovered, engaged with, loved, touched, you have not clung to it. You have not made it yours in this chippu way, You have been free. And when you come from a place of lightness of touch, of freedom, then you end up doing things that outlast you, actually. Then people mourn for you, truly mourn for you. and you go with a smile on your face. You know, it's such a beautiful doha.
Yeah. There's one more question, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll have time for just one more question if you want to quickly send. But Bibha Tripathi, who was the first one to ask the question, is asking again, don't you feel time has come to move towards Nirgun Bhakti Marg to maintain secularism?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. Yes, I think the invitation to constantly remember the Nirgun is a very important lesson Kabir gives us. To constantly come unstuck from the Sagun, the forms that we attach ourselves to, and to acknowledge the Nirgun. But really, let us not become intolerant about Sagun either, because then we are just repeating the same paradigm. Then we become intolerant Nirgunis, right? And that's, I think, why Kabir says, had anhad dono taje wako naam fakir. Okay, had tape so aulia, behad tape so peer. Had anhad dono tape wako naam fakir. So it is not about, ultimately, it's not about Sagun or even Nirgun. It is your capacity to move between the two. You know, I think Kabir was called a Nirguni because he reminds us constantly of the Nirgun. But I don't think Kabir has a problem with the Sagun, because Kabir celebrates the body. This body is Sagun. It has a form. It has a shape. It is the vehicle to discover the Nirgun. Nirgun Raja pe Sirgun Sage Bichai, he says in a bhajan. So the two need each other. Form and emptiness are one, as the Buddhists will say. So in another doha, he says, Sirgun ki seva karo, Nirgun ka karo gyan. Sirgun Nirgun ke beech mein taha rakho dhyan. You know? So he's not denying the Sagun. He's saying, in fact, Sagun ki seva karo. You know, we don't want to put down this body. We don't want to put down the beauty and the joy of particularity, of language, of flavor, of rasa. All this comes from form. You know, it would be a very nearest place if we had no form. Uski seva karo, keep it with care and love. But always remember the formless. Uska bhi karo, gyan, know it, that the form and the formless are one. And bring your attention, your dhyan, to that space between the two, always moving.
I was putting on hold the several requests for you to, sing one of the way you do, not maybe with the accompanying instruments, but if you could.
Maybe I will just sing briefly. And maybe I find it very, very difficult to sing really without. So I'm not sure how much time we have, but I'll just sing maybe half a song.
And then we'll end with your song.
Right.
And for people like me, you may have to explain what it means before the way you do.
Okay, so I'll sing just a couple of lines from a song I love called Ari Gagan Ma Jot Jalant Hai, Enu Akhand Bhayo Ujvalo. In this sky dome, in this sky, there is a light and it is unfragmented. Ari Gagan Ma Baja Baje, Enu Jhenu Jhenu Jhankaro. In this sky, an instrument is playing very, very subtle, subtle, subtle sound. Listen to that. Mharo Ram Rameche Rangaro. This is my Ram who dwells in this sky. This is where my Guru is. Mharo Pirbhu Rameche Niradharo. My God plays with no scaffolding, no structures, no brand identities. Okay, just a few lines.
Thank you so much, Shabnam. Really appreciate you coming and spending time. You know, it's of course the audience that we have, but you know, there is also a large number of young adults that are in the university, in the school where I teach, and of course in the place where you teach. They, like anyone else, or probably perhaps more than anyone else, are facing or are confronted with us uncertainty, and you know, I'm not sure we have the answers. Sometimes we need to go back and find the answers in Kabir, who other than that. So thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in the show. Next week we are going to be joined by a political scientist and intellectual, Christophe Jaffrelot from Paris, who's going to talk about reservations and the other backward classes. So do tune in, same day, same time, on One Story, One Voice. And thank you to my IT team, to the marketing team, and to the research team that produces this show. Thank you, Shabnam, once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good night, good luck, and stay safe.